Ahoy there! Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video for Infinite Lagrange. This video has been sponsored by NetEase, and if you're concerned as to what that means in regards to the impartiality of my content, then please do check the description down below for a link to my Discord, where I've put a public release statement out there regarding this sponsorship that will hopefully assuage any fears you may have. In today's video, we're going back to our series of the blueprint breakdowns, where I take a look at each of the different blueprints and ships in Infinite Lagrange, and we discuss that ship and all its variations, how you might use these, how you might fit them in a fleet, and all the kinds of crazy cool stuff that you can do with them. Today's video is going to take a slightly different turn in that there are no variations on this blueprint. It is a singular, and we're going to be taking a look at a Corvette, the Antonius Consortium Cellular Defender. Now, if you do enjoy this video, please let me know by hitting like on it, sub to the channel, that would be amazing, and of course if you want to go the extra mile to help support my content and what I do, please check out both my Patreon page, where you can pledge to support me and learn a little bit more about my life here in Zimbabwe, and I do have a Redbubble merchandise store that you can check out as well. Otherwise, with all of that said and done then, let's jump into talking about the Cellular Defender Heavy Torpedo Corvette. Now, normally when I do a blueprint breakdown video, I will talk about the stats first of all before I start showcasing how this actually works in combat, but here with the Cellular Defender, I wanted to actually showcase a couple of performance analyses before we get in, just to sort of highlight why I love this Corvette so much. So the first one we have on screen here shows 307.3k anti-ship damage up against a battlecruiser, a couple of battlecruisers, and some aircraft type CASO 66s. The second one here is an even more eye-watering 348.9k going up against carriers, battlecruisers, and cruisers. This is an absolutely insane little Corvette. It's relatively easy to unlock, and as you can see here, I have pumped pretty much every tech point I find in a box for Corvettes into this. I've taken it all the way up to 50 before even having a look at any of the other Corvettes that I fly, because this thing, as far as I'm concerned, is absolute madness. If we have a look at its combat rolls, you can see we have an anti-ship capability here, grade of S, superior anti-ship firepower, equipped with various anti-ship weapons, and they're not kidding. Let's have a look at that firepower stat there. 10,125 anti-ship firepower. That starts with a basic 6,474, which is pretty mad on its own, and then enhancing by a further 3,651, 10,125 damage. Just spend a moment to look at that number and realize there are cruisers that do less than that. This is basically a cruiser that you can get multiple of, launch from your ships, and just go absolutely ham against your opponent's fleet. Now, it does describe the Heavy Torpedo Corvette here as a multi-role type, and that's reflected with its stats. We've got a pretty respectable air defense here of 2,148, which I've enhanced up to 2,859. That's not going to be taking out Sand Drakes or Spores anytime soon, but it is still pretty respectable, and it means if your opponent has any aircraft, then these Heavy Torpedo Corvettes are actually going to be helping you take those out. Also, its siege damage, because of course we're using heavy torpedoes, the siege damage isn't bad at all either. 1,656, 1,656, I've upped that to 2,598. This means that basically, if you have the Cellular Defender in your fleet, you're going to do pretty well against the ships that you're up against, including any aircraft they might have, and then when you start hitting the cities themselves, this is just going to do insane amounts of damage there as well. Again, that's better than a lot of frigates, destroyers, and even some cruisers have in regards to siege damage. That is just mad for a Corvette. And let's look at how we do this. First of all then, the Torpedo Attack System, CT4-4500 Beehive Torpedo Launching System. And I love the fact that it's called the Beehive. That's just, I think that's one of the things I love about this ship the most, actually. It is a projectile damage type weapon, of course, being torpedoes, meaning it applies against armor, not against shields. It prioritizes against large ships, mainly battle cruisers and cruisers, and if it doesn't have those, it'll go after anything else it can find. Siege fire is fairly high on the priority there. You can see, again, that very respectable siege damage there. Duration 4-second firing round, attacks 4 times, attack interval of 11.2 seconds, so it's fairly fast firing for a torpedo as well, which is pretty cool. And of course, being a Corvette, you don't even have to use those precious torpedo and missile weapon blueprints in order to upgrade it. You just use the aircraft and bomber and Corvette ones, which, if you're anything like me, are readily available. I'm sitting on hundreds of these things. Every time I unlock a Corvette or aircraft, I can just upgrade it straight to 30% pretty much the second I get my hands on the blueprint, which is pretty cool in itself. You'll notice though that unlike most torpedoes, the Beehive doesn't have an innate heavy crit damage or the ability to ablative through armour. This comes through our enhancements, and you'll see we've got a sympathetic detonation and a weak point detection enhancement, both of which increase our weapon system's crit damage by 40% there for the weak point detection and 50% for the sympathetic detonation. This, in my opinion, is one of the best things about torpedoes. That ability to deal additional firepower is just really useful. The other enhancements I've gone for here, increasing all of my missile torpedo damage by 10%, 2 of those, a weapon system cooldown by 50%, twice. There is over here one that you can reduce the chance of all torpedoes being intercepted as well, which is actually pretty useful, especially if you're going up against fleets that have intercepting weaponry. Like, for example, we talked about the Eris last week. The Eris destroyer can intercept incoming missiles quite nicely with some of its weaponry. If you're up against those, do consider going for the ammo stealth processing instead. I would take that instead of one of the weapon cooldowns personally, because again, we're going up against armor, so going for additional alpha damage is usually better. Even if sometimes the weapon cooldown might show higher DPM increase, the actual alpha damage is what you want to go for with projectile weapons for the most part. You can go for missile hit rate and torpedo hit rate here as well. We've got these here. Those are both possible things that you can use. Honestly though, I don't really seem to have any problems, because obviously you're going up against large targets for the most part anyway. You seem to hit pretty well. I haven't thoroughly tested, but ultimately I'm not sure whether the weapon system cooldown reduction of 15% is going to be better than the large target correction here, or that stealth processing, but for the most part, well, you've seen the results I'm getting. 348.9k anti-ship damage compared to a fleet of Xenostingers, their 10 Xenostingers only doing 230 odd DPM instead. So 8 Corvettes did more damage than 10 fully upgraded Xenostingers. That's kind of what we're talking about here. It's insane. If we come out a little bit further, we then have the rapid-fire battery system. This is made up of 2 parts, a near-defense cannon and a rapid-fire cannon. The rapid-fire cannon is anti-ship fire against destroyers, frigates, and cruisers, so again, this will shoot against cruisers quite comfortably before it then just targets anything. The other type is the near-defense cannon. This, of course, prioritizes corvettes and fighters. And you'll see here that both of these have anti-aircraft range, so they will shoot at any aircraft that happen to get too close to them. Anti-aircraft range here is only attacking aerial targets that attack you. These don't tend to go hunting for other aerial targets, but if you are up against an opponent that has things like, say, Spores or Sandrakes or other anti-air fighters, then they will come after your Cellular Defenders, and your Cellular Defenders will fight back, which is a really interesting part of them. Again, the upgrades here, 30%, really, really easy to do because it's standard upgrades. I haven't fully upgraded here, but you'll notice what I've gone for here straight away in its enhancements is the anti-aircraft measures upgrade. This is a straight up enhancement strategy. When attacked by enemy aircraft, it decreases the weapon system cooldown by 80% for 15 seconds. It basically means if something does come a little bit too close here to my Cellular Defenders, something like Spores or whatever, this opens fire with that anti-aircraft cannon and just shoots at a blindingly fast rate back at them. This means that again we can go for all cannon damage increase enhancements there for extra damage against anything that does happen to be shooting at us, followed by weapon system cooldowns just to make that a real rapid fire. Again, we can go for fighters and corvette hit rate, but I don't really bother because I don't want the Cellular Defender worrying about this too much. It's just additional damage, and if there's no aircraft, then these are going to affect if the rapid fire battery system is firing at cruisers or things like that as well. Okay, it's not a huge amount of damage, but to me it's still better than a hit rate that won't affect anything if I'm going up against, you know, non-aircraft targets. So that's how I build that. I build this with the intention of it hunting down large ships, mainly cruisers and battle cruisers and carriers, but it can fire back against aircraft. But anti-air capabilities are going to be offloaded onto other ships, other aircraft in my fleet as well. I will have my own Spores, my own Sandrakes and stuff like that for air superiority. The propulsion system, I have gone for the ship evasion enhancement here, because 8% ship evasion is just hard to pass up for, I think that's 8 skill points. It's not 8 enhancement points, it's not much at all. You can go again for the target selection time. I will probably go for one of these once I've got a few more skill points, a few more enhancement points under my belt to spend there. The armor system, this is one I really don't rate much, just increasing HP. They're not really taking damage for me, so, you know, I don't see it as a big thing, but I would probably go for the missile and torpedo short-range stealth coating before I go for additional HP, if I wanted to really pump this all the way up. And there is also a situational awareness system built into this, which is basically leading on nicely from that enhancement of reducing being hit by missiles. 30% reduction there to being hit by missiles. It just means that if your opponent is using missile anti-aircraft, like for example something like the Winged Hussar, then this will essentially bypass the majority of that. And that's basically all there is to it. I launched this out of a Jaeger. I will do a video on the Jaeger as well, because I do have both types of this. If I go into, so not battle cruisers, and then down to the Jaeger, the auxiliary type Jaeger with its Corvette loading system, this launches 4 of these. This is what I've been using for those performance analysis that we saw earlier. They were launched, it's 8 Corvettes being launched from 2 Jaegers. These are back row ships, they carry 4 Corvettes, they've got some really nice enhancements, which we will talk about in a future video. And to me, they just work absolute wonders. They twin really nicely with the Jaeger. Of course, you can still launch them from something like, for example, if you have the CASO 66 aircraft type, that is of course capable of launching Corvettes, only 2 of those though, and if we were to go into destroyers, obviously from the early part of the game as well, you do have access to things like the AC-721 aircraft type, which can launch a couple of Corvettes off it, and even things like, for example, the Guardian dual-purpose type can launch Corvettes when I eventually get around to that. Yeah, there are other ways as well that you can launch those Corvettes, but for me, the Jaeger is the one that twins nicest with it. I absolutely adore this ship. To me, it even outclasses the CVT-800, which I played with a lot on my last Phase 2 server. I enjoyed it, it's an excellent ship, but it couldn't pull the same numbers as the Cellular Defender. Now, the Cellular Defender, I will admit, you want to be using this from the point that you start going up against majority cruiser targets. Cruisers, battle cruisers, and carriers are what this thing excels at taking out. It will go after destroyers and frigates, but it's just not quite as good. If you are going up against those, then obviously the torpedo attack system enhancements that increase your hit rate against frigates and destroyers are going to be useful, just to make sure you can actually apply your damage, because it's all very well and good having 10,125 damage. I just love saying that, 10,125 damage on a Corvette. It's all very well and good having those numbers, but if you can't actually hit anything with it, well, you're not actually doing anything. Anyway folks, that's my thoughts and opinions here regarding the Cellular Defender. This, by far in my opinion, is the best Corvette in the entirety of Infinite Lagrange. I love it, it deals insane amounts of damage, and I strongly recommend using it if you have one. Yes, even over the CVT-800. It is an insanely good Corvette, and I really hope you can get some cool usage out of it as well. If you haven't got it already, good luck finding it in a box. It is, again, I found these fairly early on 3 of my separate accounts. Well worth going into. Good luck, folks, happy sailing, and see you in Infinite Lagrange.